I wish that
Mhm,
every college,
mhm.
every major within every college required internships,
Yeah. Yeah.
because one of the main problems I'm running into right now with my leadership coaching and development within companies is that only 22% is the latest statistic I saw from 2023, but only 22% of students have worked
Mhm.
by the time they graduate from college. So they get it if they miraculously get a job,
Yeah.
they not only have to learn how to do that job,
You have
they
to
have to
learn.
learn how to work.
Welcome to the Selfish Show, where we explore the courage that it takes to know yourself and be yourself, and where I selfishly ask all kinds of questions of my guests. And I'm your host, Dr. Lem Usita, identity formation coach, guide, former professor, all these wonderful things that I don't do anymore. And today we're diving into the world of Gen Z with someone who
Mm.
understands them deeply, Kelly
But is
Soifer.
not one.
Yeah, but it's not one. Yeah. Kelly's a leadership coach with 4 decades of experience helping individuals and organizations become their better selves. She's also a contemplative, which I absolutely love. And she's also a cat lover, which I cannot relate
Lamb,
to at all,
lamb.
you
Okay,
know?
I'll
But
help you.
but today we're asking who Gen Z are becoming and how we can support their journey toward identity and authenticity. So Kelly, thank you so much for being on the show
Oh,
and
it's a
sharing
privilege.
some insight and wisdom. Yeah.
Well, we'll see. We'll decide at the end whether it's insight and wisdom, but thank you.
No, I've heard some of your stuff and I've read some of your stuff and I'm really excited, looking forward to it. So thank you. I listened to your podcast with Dr. Morales on the Rising Tide Leadership podcast, and would you mind just sharing a little bit about yourself before we jump into some Gen Z stuff?
Well, sure. Really, really, really quickly. I won't give the same story there. They can go to that podcast if they're dying to know. But
Yeah.
I worked with youth directly for about 30 years. And after about 30 years, I thought, and youth, I would say, was fifth through 12th grade,
Uh-huh.
but then kind of started bleeding into college. And after doing that for, like I said, for 3 decades, I kind of thought, the state of work with young people is not getting better. And maybe I can offer some input, you know? So I started doing some coaching and training, and that started initially with churches, but then it moved into the academic space, started doing some practicum classes in terms of internship programs,
Okay.
running some internship programs, and now I do leadership coaching, mostly in just the nonprofit space, but also in the tech space and some higher ed. And so I have clients now who are Gen Z, whereas before I had students who were Gen Z. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting dynamic. And then I have a niece and nephew who are 24 and 27, so I feel like I have.
Perfect. You got a lab. I looked you up on YouTube and I saw that you had done a couple of chapels at Westmont. I
Mhm.
didn't listen to those yet, but that where you did some of your, were you at Westmont
Yeah,
for
no,
a little?
I started teaching practicum classes back in 2009 for Westmont, and just to finish my last one, probably my last one last year. So I did 15 years of practicum classes there. So yeah, I live in Santa Barbara,
Okay.
uh, be,
In which department?
because well, it started in religious studies, but then it kind of morphed over. I did some for sociology. They have an off-campus program. I did some internship practicums for them. I even did some stuff with the Department of Kinesiology.
Come on, that's awesome. We have that in common as well. Like I oversaw all the internship programs at some of the schools that I taught in, and so.
Neat. Yeah, it's a very under-supported aspect. I mean, I wish that
Mhm,
every college,
mhm.
every major within every college required internships,
Yeah. Yeah.
because one of the main problems I'm running into right now with my leadership coaching and development within companies is that only 22% is the latest statistic I saw from 2023, but only 22% of students have worked
Mhm.
by the time they graduate from college. So they get it if they miraculously get a job,
Yeah.
they not only have to learn how to do that job,
You have
they
to
have to
learn
learn how to work.
how to work. Yeah.
And that's what I would focus my practicum classes on, is like, this is what it means to work, because they don't even know.
Yeah, service learning was a huge component of some of the stuff that I've done. Yeah, it's pretty amazing to see how many college graduates there are without any kind of work experience, and
Yeah,
22%
because
like
they've been
that.
so busy doing all the extracurriculars that they're told that it's going to take to get into the right school. Or there's just not jobs because, especially after the financial downturn of 2009, 2010, or 2008, 2009,
Yeah.
Jobs that used to be held by high school and college students that got taken by adults.
Yeah.
So they just didn't have the work.
Man. Well,
It's insane.
you told us a little bit about your work with Gen Z, but how did you get pulled into their world, youth ministry and teaching and
Yeah, youth ministry teaching, just in continuing to work with young people. I mean, it's so funny. I had a former student come over yesterday who's 27, and she dropped off some oyster mushrooms that she had grown, and I thought this was
awesome?
so Gen Z,
Yeah.
just the best. But I've always loved working with students because, and if there's any students listening, please don't think I'm being condescending here, but they think they're thinking original thoughts, right?
Yeah.
They think that they're thinking things that have never been thought for the first time. And I love being around that because it's so
Mhm,
refreshing.
mhm.
Because I find that most older generations tend to lead toward becoming jaded or cynical, whereas
Mhm.
young people still have that earnest energy and
Yeah.
desire and to discover and create, at least till recently. And one of the big struggles I think I've had is I'm finding that kind of cynicism and doubt within Gen Z, and that concerns me.
Hmm. They have access that we never had when we were
Yeah,
younger. Like
they
they don't
they
have
have
to ask
so much.
permission. Yeah. And they could just publish and well, but then they're also models and photographers and filmmakers. Like, they didn't have to go through the process or
Right.
permission.
They can slide into someone famous. They can slide into their
Yeah.
DMs and
Yeah.
just say, "Yo, I just wanted to kind of say hi." And
Yeah.
for some reason, maybe they'll connect with that person. Like I think about what happened after the horrible Parkland shooting,
Mhm.
and those kids were 17, and they slid into the DMs of a bunch of famous people to say, "Hey, we need your help and support with this movement."
Right.
And all of a sudden, all these 17-year-olds are commanding international attention.
Yeah.
And it's like they don't need us anymore to give them whatever
Right.
they needed. But they
Yeah.
also don't know what to do with that kind of information and access, unfortunately. It's
Yeah.
just too much.
A- And so you've already, I mean, I was going to ask you if there was a moment that made you go, oh, this is a different kind of generation, but you just like rattled off a whole bunch.
But yeah, I mean, I can give you the overarching what kind of
Yes.
caught my attention the most, and that is basically to pull the camera back. The last 25 years
Hmm.
have been crazy.
Hmm.
Buying in 1999, 9/11,
Hmm.
the smartphone
Yeah.
was 2007, I think. 2000, no, 2000, 2007. Yeah. Social media,
Yeah.
2010. The financial crisis, which was the worst in 100 years in
Hmm.
2008 and 2009. Active shooter drills, mass shootings.
Hmm.
I'm coming into office and creating, and there's just so much division, the pandemic.
Hmm.
I mean, that leading up to now, what we're dealing with the chaos today and all
Yeah.
the continued division. So these last 25 years have been really, that's Generation Z, and that's
Yeah.
what they've grown up under. So
Yeah.
there's so much fear and so much mistrust. They don't know who to trust. There's no institution that seems stable or faith worthy of following. And
Hmm.
so they feel isolated.
Mm.
And that concerns me. And so that whole thing, that whole cohort really is of interest to me to understand and to figure out what our future holds in
Yeah.
that regard. Because those 25, and people will sometimes be a little dismissive if I bring this up and they'll say, wouldn't you, come on, Kelly, wouldn't you be honest that most generations, when they graduate from college, they're young, they're green, they're naive, and they just have to, take some hits and and learn from their mistakes. I said, yeah,
Hmm.
but no generation has had exposure to so much and so much information all at
Hmm.
once.
Hmm.
And it's flooding them and overwhelming them. When I graduated, with 1983, but I mean, there was three channels on TV
Right. Right.
and FM radio,
Right.
and I
Yeah.
just went and got a job. And then I remember, yeah, Reagan got shot. That happened. And
Hmm.
that's about all I remember from my, when I graduated, because I just needed to go get a job. I mean, I
Yeah.
wasn't aware of what was going on.
Yeah.
So,
Like I brought the way that I describe it is I brought a typewriter to college. Like I really,
me too.
like I just typing. Well, and then we got a computer and printer and all of that my
Well,
second year.
you're
But
lucky.
yeah, I got an email. Like the school that I went to was a showcase site for IBM, and so all the universities would come check out, this small college campus that had, that was already connected. But like when we had signposts along the way to help us with identity, like, and I don't know that, yeah, I don't know that this generation has that. And so that's why I like talking about identity, and that's why this channel is about identity. And would you tell me or give me your perspective on the core identity struggle that you see Gen Z facing today? Well, you kind of mentioned a little bit about trust and
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm wrapping my head around, trying to see the best way to come up with an answer that's
hmm
concise. I think the core identity struggle, I've learned all my stuff about identity formation from just following Eric Erickson's
yeah,
psychosocial stages
yeah,
of development, right?
yeah.
And that the core identity development happens between the ages of 10 and 24.
hmm
Problem now is they don't have anyone to look to. And I'm making some generalizations. Of course, they
Sure.
might have some people, but either they're looking to the wrong people or they literally don't have adults that they feel like they can look at and say, I want to be like them
Mm,
to help them figure out who they are. And because life is moving so quickly, and because critical thinking skills, problem solving skills are not cultivated because of they can just Google it or chat GPT it or
yeah,
Wikipedia it, they don't have to sit with something to figure it out. They
yeah,
just kind of take the first answer and they go with it.
yeah.
So the core identity crisis for me is that they don't know that they should be figuring that out for themselves. They just
Mm,
get swept caught up in the stream.
mhm.
I mentioned I ran an intern program. I ran an intern program for 8 years for a particular church denomination, and over those 8 years, I had 72, I think so, 72 interns. The denomination really wanted me to develop the next generation of pastors, right? And I had to tell them the students don't want to be pastors.
Right?
They want internships,
Yeah.
but they don't want to become pastors because there's no pastors that they admire.
Mm,
Well, that went over like a lead balloon, let me tell you that. So, but it was like let's fix that rather than just think we need to keep shoving more kids in the system. And that's like just putting paint and carpet on
yeah.
a beat up house and pretending like it's brand new. It's not going to fix
Right.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're in a interesting dynamic where they they deal with more adult themes earlier because it's
Hmm.
available online. And like you said, like in the Erickson schema, they don't have the struggle, right? And the crisis is what creates identity. And if you can get all the answers with a Google or Chat GPT, chat, like
But
you don't
they
you
don't
don't really
have to
struggle.
argue with they don't know how to argue with the answer, or they just
Yeah,
accept it.
yeah. You know, just recently I was thinking about how like when I was in college, like in the early 90s, like I was online, but we hid behind a screen name. Like I could be whoever I wanted to be, and I
Right.
had that anonymity. And then Facebook came along in like 2004, and then we had to use a real world. This is my real name. Like they wouldn't take fake names, because it was connected to your .edu email address, and so you had to use your real name. But after 10 plus years of behaving, the way I wanted to without anyone knowing it was me, like then we had to use our real world names and we didn't change the behavior, right? All of those things that we should have kept hidden and those thoughts, like, so like on the one hand, we have the authenticity, and then on the other hand, we have like, this curated, you know, version of ourselves.
A
So
persona.
like, yeah, these Gen Z has like a wider range of emotions and thoughts and ideas that they have to like navigate, but like they aren't, their identity, their cognitive ability, the emotionality of it, it's just way beyond anything that they've, you know, developed their process. And like I mean, I couldn't do it today. I couldn't do that wide a spectrum. Can you speak to that? Like how does that delayed adolescence, that performative authenticity thing like impact their sense of self?
Well, I think that they think that there's some standard out there, you know, that
Yeah.
they have to meet,
Mm,
and if they can't do that, then they don't want to try,
Mhm.
or they need to wait until they can reach that one perfect standard. So things
Mhm.
get delayed. All the classic milestones
Mm.
of development get delayed. Or they graduate from college, since they've never had a job, they don't know what to do. Their major didn't really prepare them for work life. They're burdened over and overwhelmed by debt,
Yeah.
and then they go home. Well, then if they go home, I mean, no offense, but they regress.
Right.
And then that slows down their development as well. And mom and dad like having them at home because then they don't have to worry about them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so then mom and dad are, I have one client, 25, and she gets dropped off by her mom to work, who also makes her lunch. And I'm like, what is wrong with this picture? Like, how many things can I name? And I don't need to shame the client. So then I want to be careful how I say it, but
Mhm.
it's not good, that they're not worrying about, how they're going to eat and how groceries and cleaning
Mhm.
their own home and doing all
Mhm.
that kind of stuff on top of having responsibilities in their job. So I think that is also a problem. The other issue that I also see is that I think they're just overwhelmed and inundated by the options and choices.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it just seems overwhelming and they don't want to make a mistake, even though that's the only way you learn is by trying something and seeing how
Right.
it works.
Right.
But they're overwhelmed and want to make a mistake and they feel out of control. They can't feel like they can have control over anything.
Mhm.
And this is the one that I could, I know almost nothing about, but I just am observing it. So I'm just throwing the thing out here, which is a little bit of a bomb, but I think that's one of the reasons that some of the stuff is going on about gender identity because it's something they can control
Mhm. Mhm.
who they are.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
can control that in their minds
Yeah.
and say, this is who I am. And when I said this to one client, you know what her response was? It was fascinating. She's a little bit older, Gen X probably. And she said, oh, it's the new anorexia,
Yeah. Yeah. No,
right?
that's a great insight.
So
Yeah.
eating disorders were a way because you felt out of control, you could control at least your
Right.
own body.
Right.
And I don't mean to dismiss, I think these questions around sexuality need a lot more freedom and a lot more openness. I don't think this is necessarily new. I think that finally Gen Z feels like they don't need permission, but they have the permission now to talk about things that I think kids
Mhm.
have struggled with forever. I
Mhm.
mean, having worked with students for as long as I have, I feel like a lot of them struggle with sexual identity because
Yeah.
they're navigating the whole minefield of dating and interacting with people and sexual feelings for the first time. And it's just
Mhm.
really confusing to them. And who do they go to?
Mhm.
And then I tease my students all the time. I say the worst thing is that you go to your friends for advice and they're as stupid as you are.
Right.
So why are you doing that?
Yeah.
But they don't have adults they feel like they can trust.
Yeah, and about the only thing worse than going to their friends is going to the internet to, like, you know, wrestle with that and experience things that, like, they can now. They don't even have to go out of the room in order to experience that. Whereas, in the past, you'd have to go outside and interact with someone and, be rejected and work through what that means and what that feels like. And, there really isn't much of that, man. So do you think well, how do you think they see authenticity? What does authenticity mean for a Gen Zer?
I don't think that word is really confusing because I don't think they've necessarily redefined authenticity.
Okay.
I think they wonder if anything is actually authentic
Okay.
because they're growing up in a generation where everything is fake, where you
But
can
they can be
Photoshop things.
themselves? But they can be themselves?
Well, what they think is themselves,
I got it. Yeah.
I mean, that was my classic observation. When I worked with youth, I feel like I'm all over the place. I apologize, but
Oh, no, I love it. This is great.
okay. When I was working with youth, junior high was actually one of my favorite groups. Everyone else was like, "How can you work with junior hires?" I'm like,
Yeah,
"Oh
no,
man, no." 7th through 10th grade is the absolute core of their doing their identity work.
mhm, mhm.
And 8th graders like dress differently every week because they're
Yeah.
trying to figure out their persona.
Yeah, exactly,
They're
exactly.
trying to figure out which group they belong to. But
Mhm.
I see this extending now with Gen Z as they're trying on different identities. And
Mm,
they can call it authentic, but they live in a world where there's no authenticity.
mm. Yeah.
Like literally. I mean, now we can get apps to take people out of photos if we don't want them in a photo.
Right.
We can obviously Photoshop everything. We
Yeah.
can AI people's voices. We can AI people's actions and faces.
Mm,
Nothing's nothing's real
mm-hmm.
in their
No.
world because the digital world is as real as the in-person world. So IRL and digital are equally real, and they have equally real identities in both places.
Mm-hmm.
And they know fewer and fewer people.
Mm-hmm.
So they know more people online than they would in person.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
They're more
I mean,
connected, but like less connected.
yeah.
No, this brings up so many interesting ideas for sure. This taps into a little bit of my research on adolescent identity formation in online space. But I got a couple more questions that I want to ask.
Mhm.
I kind of want to go down that rabbit hole, but Gen Zers, how are they currently finding belonging or grounding? I mean, yeah, you just said that they're kind of in a world of fake and not real, but what does that look like for them if they can't find that?
I mean, in fantasy, in anime,
Okay.
in avatars,
Yeah.
in chat rooms,
Mm-hmm.
in bots, in AI bots that are giving them weird intimacy. I mean,
Yeah.
it all sounds like science fiction to me, but
But it's a reality. It's what
yeah,
they're
and I'm really
doing.
struggling with it because when you say where do they find their grounding, and I appreciate it, Benedict, and you mentioned I'm a contemplative. I really wear that like trying to say that as humbly as possible because I don't want to sound like I'm being pretentious, but I have sought to go inward more and more the older and older I get and realize I want to
Mm-hmm.
cultivate habits of reflection
Mm-hmm.
and just kind of unpack like what's going on for me right now. What am I
Mm-hmm.
thinking? What am I feeling? Why did I
Mm-hmm.
say what I said? Why do I feel what I feel?
Yeah.
And I think students have not been taught how to do that. They're just told to shut up and just do what they're told,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's a teacher, whether it's a coach, whether it's a snowplow parent, and just say, just put your head down. And so they just become pretty passive
Okay.
around other adults. So I don't think they find their grounding with adults. I think they might find it in online spaces. They might find it with a couple really core relationships with peers,
Yeah.
but it's not a big world.
Yeah.
It's a small tight space, but it's also with an identity or cause,
Yeah.
right?
As
So
opposed to
whatever,
something internal, like this
yeah,
is who I am.
it's whoever their, and I hate this word gets overused a lot, but their tribe,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Well, so if they can't find their grounding, like issues like anxiety, loneliness, and mental health, like really is a big deal for them. And I was just listening to another podcast and they were talking about, well, it was a Gen Zer like talking about, Gen Z, and they have like the language for mental health, but I don't know that they're using those terms exactly like
Right.
how, it's meant to be used. So they have like,
Oh,
psychology speak.
I don't think we do either. I mean, I have to be
Yeah.
careful. I throw around words like triggered and
Yeah.
trauma
Yeah.
very easily. Now, part of it is I've been in and out of counseling my whole adult life. Thank you,
Okay.
mom and dad.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think we all need to be careful that we're throwing around those words a lot. But
Uh-huh.
it's hard not to when you've heard them and you feel like you've experienced them in your own life. But yeah, they do. They do have a lot of the psychology. They're pretty sophisticated when it comes to mental health. I mean, I'm intrigued that the new Ice Bucket Challenge is about mental health awareness
Yeah.
after whatever it was 10 years ago or however
Yeah.
long it was with
Yeah.
ALS. But now there's one around mental health awareness. And I think, there's things going around, people saying like they're creating all these problems and diagnoses that don't exist. And I'm like, no, there's just more awareness
Yeah.
and more ability to screen for things. But I think we just have to be careful to really get at the heart and root of why they're feeling what they're feeling and
Yeah.
what they're experiencing. If I was their age, I would have anxiety and loneliness too,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
the world is pretty scary and dystopian. I mean, anything that's popular on TV seems to involve zombies or The Last of Us or Handmaid's
Yeah.
Tale
Yeah.
or, it's all really dark. I mean,
Really extreme.
yeah, I mean, it's not to mention the realities of climate change and
Yeah.
tensions, racial tensions, and the economy and the job market, and it goes on and on.
Well, in light of that, can I ask you what surprises, is there anything that surprises you in the way that they engage with purpose and spirituality or meaning making? I know we just talked about how they have no grounding and they're like really anxious, but like, have you seen them engage in purpose or spirituality or meaning making?
I mean, some purpose. I mean, I think sometimes they'll find a cause that they really care about. You know, they'll really care about the climate crisis, or they'll care about the environment, or they'll care about tensions, racial tensions and inequality and marginalized populations, LGBTQ and things like that. I don't find them very reflective, like in the way that I would when I've done internship classes, I try to provide a journal prompt every week and ask them to respond to it. And their journal prompts are like answers. They aren't thoughts. You know, they'll just and I feel like I kind of want to shake them and say, you're telling me what you think I want to hear. You're not actually engaging with it. But I can't get mad at them for that. Like they just haven't been encouraged to slow down enough to be reflective.
Mm,
And I mean, I think they might have a, vibe is a popular word right now, I guess. I
yeah.
mean, I think they'll feel a certain vibe, or they'll have some sort of experience, but I don't feel like they want to dig in and go deep with
Mm-hmm.
it and kind of
Mm-hmm.
get existential with it and really work through some big questions.
Yeah.
I don't mean to be disparaging there,
No,
but
no, no. It's really interesting because I'm working with a couple Gen Zers right now, just working with their identity and trying to help them figure those things out. And like the whole worksheet has to do with reflective practices and reflecting on who they are, what they've done, what your current situation is, what your values are, where you want to be, and what are the skills that you need in order to get you there. And I just had the conversation to set that up with them was, what are your identity scripts? What is your internal narrative? Like, what
mm,
are the things that you're saying to yourself? And it's not easy for them to, it's not easy for them to hear that because they don't sit still long enough in order to hear those things. And so, like, in some of the identity coaching that I do, like, I mean, you hit the nail right on the head. Like, it's really helping them to reflect and like modeling it for them, because I can't just tell them how to do it. I have to give my this is what it looks like for me. These are the things that I'm thinking. These are some of my internal narratives, and it helps them to then, just kind of process through theirs. But yeah, that's a really fascinating insight. Yeah,
it's
they can't.
interesting. With my coaching, I use an approach called the 5 whys,
Mhm.
WHY,
Okay.
and it's used in manufacturing actually to
Okay.
determine what's the real cause of a problem. Toyota came up with it. I couldn't tell you when, the 90s, I'm going to guess,
Yeah.
but basically, when you ask someone a question in coaching, they'll give you an answer, and I don't mean this meanly, but it's not the real answer.
Yeah.
It's the initial answer, right?
Right.
But then instead of moving forward with that answer, what you need to do is stop and listen and say, so build on that. Why, like,
Yeah.
so how did you respond to that situation? Well, I was really scared. Well, why were you really scared?
Yeah.
Well, I felt kind of threatened. What was threatening about it? Well, I felt like they were trying to tell me what to do, and I don't like being told what to do.
Uh-huh.
Why do you like not being told what to do?
Yeah.
But again, you got to slow that whole thing down and get them to start really unpacking it. And I call it getting under the hood, but
Yeah.
really digging in and helping them kind of unpack where that response came from, where
Mhm.
that feeling or where that word or where that reaction or
Uh,
so, but that takes work,
yeah. An
you know,
insight.
an
And a lot
insight.
and a lot of patients. I was listening to something today, and they were saying they were talking about how, like, when someone says a thing, wait a couple of moments for 2 reasons. One, to calm yourself down, but then the other thing is to let them hear what they just said,
Mm,
because
interesting.
we just jump right on top of it, and they don't even get to process what they just said to you. And so, like, that space really gives us some time to do that. But in light of that, like, I love what you were saying earlier. I don't know if you use the word scared or worried, but I love your perspective on how, like, it's kind of our responsibility to teach them. You know what I mean? Like, instead of like picking on them and saying these are all the wrong things that they're doing, like, we have to model that. And adolescence, modeling is like the main mode of learning. Where do adults, educators, coaches, mentors, what do we tend to get wrong about Gen Z?
Oh, a million things, but um, This is my big one, and if you watch that course that I've done on LinkedIn Learning, little commercial,
Yes.
we label Gen Z as self-absorbed,
Hmm.
that they're just totally into themselves. They just want to have their head down into their phones, or they just care about their friends and they don't care about anything else.
Hmm.
And I'm not going to lie. I mean, they have their perfectly curated Chipotle or boba tea order, right?
Yes.
They have a playlist for everything.
Yes.
They have a photo album for every special event they've ever
Hmm.
wanted to remember,
Hmm.
right? They've had an Uber come and get them wherever they are. So they literally think the world revolves around them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
And that would be nice if that was true.
Yeah.
But who created all that technology?
Hmm.
We did.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We made them this way. So
Yeah.
don't get mad at them.
Right. Right.
We did this
Right.
to them.
Yeah.
So that's what the adults are getting wrong, is that they're mad at them. And it's like, well, put the mirror on yourself. First of all, you're as addicted to your phone as they are to theirs. So,
Right.
you know, shut
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
But also, we created this monstrous situation that we're in,
Hmm.
and we've got to figure out how to get out of it. And so, what they get wrong is they don't meet students and young people on their terms.
Yeah.
They demand that they come to them. And that was
Yeah.
my number one mode of operation whenever I worked with students, is I would always make it a priority to meet students on their terms.
Hmm.
And that meant, going to a lot of JV baseball games and junior high
Yeah.
band concerts and
Sure.
high school football games. I never, ever wanted to go to those things. Like,
Right.
if I did, that'd be kind of a problem, but
Yeah.
that's where they were and that was their world and I had to go to those things. So same thing with our young people, is we've got to show curiosity and say, tell me more about why you care about this or like this thing,
Mhm.
you know, even though you understand nothing about what they're talking about. I get Fast Company magazine and I read it and I understand about half of what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I don't really understand Discord. I don't
Right.
really, I mean, I've had students show me what they do on Snap and I'm like, my brain, what are you doing? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
snapping all these photos and doing all that, and I can't keep up. But if I
Yeah.
don't ask and show curiosity, I'm in
Yeah.
trouble.
Yeah. I realized, like, when I was a youth pastor, I would try to keep up with the culture and the trends and all of that. And then
Good.
as I worked through my doctoral program, I realized that, like, the developmental side, the developmental psychology of people will never change, right? The culture, all of the toys and the gadgets, like, that'll all change. But how people grow, how people develop, how, how they develop their cognitive ability, like, all of that is never going to change, right? You have to grow in your ability. And so it helps me to think developmentally about adolescence, because if I start thinking about the cultural side and all the toys and gadgets and apps and all of that, like, I can get overwhelmed by that. But at the end of the day, here's a kid that needs love. Here's a kid that needs to understand that they are loved. Here's a kid that needs to understand that they're in the process of becoming themselves. Oh, how have you I mean, you shared a little bit. Man, you, like, anticipate all of my questions. I have all these questions, but, like, you've already kind of answered them. But you already mentioned that they can't reflect, and to help them reflect, to help them model.
They haven't been coached or taught how to reflect. Yeah, I think they can if they were taught, but they haven't been. That has not been cultivated. They've been taught to give the right answers.
Is that
Period.
through education? Education
Yeah,
taught them that? Okay.
and parents. I mean,
Yeah.
saying this is what you're going to need to get ahead with, and you need to be involved in these things, and they mean well. But
And I sense you have this, like, you want them in you want them to experience themselves in a much deeper way.
yeah,
Because it's all superficial, like, it's what you present, it's how you curate yourself online, and there's a depth of who you are and how, like you said, like, how you're feeling. But that has to be modeled, that has to be taught.
yeah, and shared with them as they experiencing it with them. I think the whole mind
Mm,
body connection is super important. I think that they're totally the mind-body connection is just separate. They don't pay attention to what's going on in their bodies,
Mhm.
which is what tends to create all the anxiety because they aren't paying attention to their
Mhm.
fear or whatever's
Mhm.
going on for them, and then they
Yeah.
get kind of dissociated from it,
Yeah.
and that creates some of the mental health challenges and tensions too. So the more that we can get them to engage with those things and just be present with them in it and not necessarily demand a bunch of answers. But again, that takes time, that takes patience, that takes one-on-one engagement. That isn't going to be something you can just do with a group of 25 kind of a thing.
Man, when I hear you say that, I was like, I was thinking through like, well, I learned that in my 40s. So I wasn't a youth pastor any longer. How could I have taught that to the kids in my youth ministry when I didn't learn that until, my 40s, like how to pay attention to what you're paying attention to. When I heard that, I'm like, well, I don't know how to do that. Like it took a while to learn how to pay attention to the
Because
things that I was paying attention to.
we
So
were not taught that in seminary.
no,
Let,
no.
let's reveal the big ugly secret. Okay. So, like, I had 24 courses I took in seminary. 23 of them were on how to teach a Bible study or give a good
Hmm.
sermon. And I
Hmm.
had one class on how to work with people. And that was actually half a class. One was the theology of youth and family, and one was actually taught by a therapist.
Yeah.
But 93% of my job was like dealing with people and their real issues. So I had to learn by trial by fire. And you're
Yeah.
right. I mean, I didn't learn it till my 40s. I fortunately was an old lady and still working with youth, but
Yeah.
and I learned through walking with them through the shadow of death. I mean, we had one season where we had a student take his life.
Uh-huh.
A young boy was killed in a bike accident.
Yeah.
Another young girl died of a brain tumor. And these were all friends or kids in our youth group.
Uh-huh.
They weren't, there'd be a big memorial service and, a lot of attention for that day. But,
Uh-huh.
2 weeks later, no one's asking them about it. We
Yeah.
went away to camp and we're supposed to go to the meeting where everyone throws a stick in the fire and gets all emotional. I skipped that part because I thought that was stupid. And
Uh-huh.
I'm like, let's go have a time together as a group.
Uh-huh.
And I said, you know what? We've never sat with the grief of what's happened to us in the last year happened in our hearts
Yeah.
and minds with our group. And I mean, to be honest, I thought it would we'd have a couple of people share and we'd maybe pray a little bit and kind of, and it was 2 hours
Uh-huh.
and it was wailing and weeping. And kids were like invited to get in touch with their grief.
Yeah.
And that's the day I really learned, like, okay, they're capable of
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
but we've got to walk them in, sit with them in it. It's kind of like, with Job, his friends get such a bad rap because they did give him terrible advice.
Uh-huh.
But at the very beginning, they did the right thing. They just sat with him and said nothing.
Yeah.
That's what we need to learn how to do with everybody, not just young people, but we need to do with everybody.
Man, that's so good. I wish as a youth pastor I knew that I needed to create a space conducive for identity formation. And
That's a
but
good
the
way of putting it.
thing is youth ministry, we teach them how to think. We tell them what music to listen to.
What
This is
clothes to
what it
wear,
looks like. Exactly.
what to believe. Yep, it's all about doctrine.
Yeah,
Yep.
but Erickson and was saying like, yeah, we need to create a space conducive for them to try out ideas in the realms, to try out ideas, relationships, and vocation, like those are the domains. And so that's why they show up, in this genre of music, wearing this kind of clothes one week, and then, they're skaters the next week. Like all of that is healthy. All of that is
Oh, it's super necessary.
it allows for them to naturally on their own process through identity. And yeah, and so you wonder why a lot of like high school graduates, once they leave youth ministry, they don't come back to the church because they finally have a space to explore their identities, to explore ideas. And it's a bummer to me that I wasn't able to create that in youth ministry. But now I teach it. I teach it to,
That's good.
but is there something you admire, find hopeful in Gen Z and how they approach identity?
Well, I mean, there's certain people that I'm really impressed by, and I hate to draw on people that are famous, but I mean, because there's ones I know that I'm really impressed by, but like, Greta Thunberg and what she's done around climate has been really profound. David Hogg, who was part of the Parkland survivors, is the like assistant head of the Democratic Party or something, and he's like 24, and
Mhm.
he's already started a nonprofit and um, called Leaders We Deserve. And then there's a young guy in Congress named Maxwell Frost. They're saying we can't trust our elders because they've left things a mess
Mhm.
and they've made promises they haven't kept. So
Mhm.
we're going to start forging our own path.
Yeah.
So that gives me hope, but I think we've got to figure out how to be in dialogue and say also like, and you need some adults around you,
Yeah.
but we've got to be adults that are trustworthy
Yeah.
because I get nervous at watching a lot of them make decisions without consulting adults who are just have more life experience. I wouldn't necessarily like they're so wise, but at least they have more life experience and they just know like, oh, don't do that.
Mm.
Like, that's going to be, and maybe it can't be a parent because they don't want to hear that from a parent. Maybe they'd want to hear it from a teacher or a coach or a
Mhm.
mentor.
Mhm. So it's actually a good thing that I have former students and a bunch of Gen Zers like hitting me up and
Hmm.
asking.
I do. Yeah.
Like, yeah, after hearing you say that, I'm like, oh, so it's not a pain that they call,
I
to
love
run
it.
some
My
idea by
gosh.
me. No, I absolutely love it. And like I was sharing earlier, like I had four former students like reach out and say, we still want to meet with you. We want to learn from you,
That's great.
Miss. But it's not a classroom situation. You're not doing it for a grade. We just want to learn from you and we
Mm,
just want you to teach us. And I said, "Uh, it helps me because then I have this lab to try out some stuff." So,
that's great.
you still have, I mean, I know you do coaching and I know you coach for work, but like people just reach out still.
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, I've lived in the same town the whole time, and so I have
Uh-huh.
students either come home or they come back and live here.
Yeah.
So they can all, I'm easy to find, and so yeah, like last week I had three different meals out with former students and like that's gonna show you how old I am. One of them's 52, two of them were 41, and one of them
Great.
was 28.
Yeah.
It was just really great conversations where there's a lot of laughing about the memories, but there's also like this is what's going on right now. And what I think
Uh-huh.
they probably enjoy, none of them have necessarily said this, but what they enjoy is seeing that I'm still kind of evolving. I'm changing.
Mm, yeah.
I'm grappling with questions and
Mhm.
doubts and fears, and they like hearing that.
Mhm.
Like you were saying, like, is there anything you admire about their process of identity formation? Isn't that what you just asked me?
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
I think what I do admire is they're saying, I don't think there is a binary answer to almost anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's not a right or wrong, black or white, yes or no. There's spectrums of
Yeah.
what we think and feel.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people in the world that don't want to hear that right now. And I think they want things to go back to the way they were. But
Yeah.
the genie's out of the bottle, the toothpaste is out of the tube.
Yeah.
Oh, things are not going back. And we've got to learn how to engage with a lot of the unknowns that are in front
Mhm.
of us right now
Yeah.
and say, I, I'm listening. One of the other things I use in coaching quite a bit is I think Charles Duhigg, the writer, calls it looping for understanding, or maybe someone else calls it that. But all that is when someone says something,
Yeah.
again, rather than forging ahead,
Yeah.
we do the silence like you're talking about.
Yeah.
You let them hear what they just said, but you also say, so what I heard you say
Yeah.
was da da da. And sometimes I didn't get it right. And
Mhm.
they're like, no, no, that's not quite what I meant. I'm like, I am so sorry. Tell me
Yeah.
again. What was it?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
again, slowing down the conversation and making sure that we're really hearing what the other person's saying. Because a lot of times we're not listening.
Yeah.
We're thinking about what we want to say next.
Right? Yeah. And we interpret it correctly. Well, that's so good. If you could coach every Gen Zer on one truth about identity, what would it be?
I feel like I've said it, but I'm happy to say it again, and that
Yes,
is to learn
please.
learn how to be reflective.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's good.
But what I mean by that is make it a habit. Like I get up every morning. Who doesn't get up every morning? Big deal.
Right.
I get up every morning. I feed my cat. I make a 3-shot espresso. I sit on the couch and I do Wordle just to make sure my brain is alert. And then I journal
Mhm. Yeah.
and I think about what happened yesterday,
Yep.
what's in front of me today, and what is on the horizon this week.
That's good.
And I kind of do some housekeeping with what happened yesterday. If I had a crappy conversation, if I had something I need to go back to and kind of repair, if there's
Mhm.
something that I'm still a little bit unclear, how am I feeling about that? Or why did I respond that way? Or what was great, and rejoice in
Yeah.
it and be thankful and have gratitude.
Yeah.
And then what am I preparing for today and to get centered because I want to
Mm.
be present when I'm with people.
Mhm. Mhm.
I don't want to be distracted by all the stuff that I haven't really thought about, but is still like flying around. I want to be centered enough to be present with the people I'm meeting
Mhm.
with. And then again, like I said, take some time to think about what's ahead so that I'm kind of ready for it, not what is that going to be like when I get to that or be afraid of it and anxious.
Mm.
So, and sometimes, that takes different directions every day. I have a couple books that I can use in reference to kind of say like, well, give me a quote to journal about or think about, or sometimes it's just doing some gratitude
Mm.
reflection. And it can get really basic. Once a month, that's a lousy way to put it. Once a month, I go with a group of friends and we provide laundry detergent and quarters to people who are unhoused so that they can do
Mm.
laundry.
Mhm.
And they get to wash their sleeping bags, their jackets, their
Yeah.
blankets, all the heavy, hardcore stuff.
Yeah.
And then we eat pizza with them and we hang out. Well, the one that happened this week didn't go so well. We had one guy get really mad and tell he was intoxicated, and it was a rough night.
Mhm.
And I just needed some time to kind of gather myself from that because it's like, why am I doing this again? Like it'd be easier to stay home.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I had to kind of work through my motivations about why I'm doing this, and I can't just do things when they're easy. I need to do things when they're hard, and I
Mm.
want to be a generous person, and he's having a hard time and I don't know his story and I can't take it personally. But I had to go through that whole circle of reminders in my head
Mhm. Mhm.
to then kind of be able to do the next day,
Yeah.
if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah. And enter into it,
Hmm.
and enter into the feelings and then set yourself up to be oh,
Right.
that's
Rather than just come
wonderful.
home and get busy with everything and just, kind of like brush it aside because it was a bummer. Because it was a bummer,
Yeah.
but I still walked toward it. And then
Yeah.
ultimately, I texted a friend who was also there, who she brings her 2 daughters. And I'm like, are the kids okay? Because they kind of saw him go
Yeah.
off and,
Yeah.
all this kind of stuff. And one of her daughters says she went to bed that night and said, I'm just so thankful I have a warm bed.
Yeah.
And that was like, yeah, it's a good reminder.
Yeah.
It was a perspective builder. And it's not just for us. Like, we've got to just go take risks. And people need to have names with some of these things that are problems in the world.
That's
Oh,
fantastic.
that's a long answer, but
No, I
it's
love it.
that's an example.
As you were talking, I wondered maybe I need to get a cat, and what does your cat teach you about like being present and reflective?
Haven't you heard the saying, dogs have owners and cats have staff? Like I exist. My cat is kind enough to let me live in my house. And he's not a jerk, but we're
Yeah.
roommates. We're roommates. We're not like, you know, he doesn't need my approval. We're
Yeah.
here in it together. And yeah, him sitting on my lap while I'm journaling, I'm not gonna lie, it's pretty great.
No, no, no. I as you said it, I was like, huh, maybe I mean, I'm probably not gonna get a cat because my wife's allergic to them.
That would probably be a bummer then. Yeah.
But I have a 21-month-old, and we exist in his
Oh,
world,
wow.
and
Wait,
like,
totally. It's no different.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Kelly, thank you so much for
My gosh,
sharing.
thank you.
This has been such a
I feel like
wonderful
I was all over the
conversation.
place, but I
Oh,
hope it was okay.
no. I love it. I love that it wasn't linear and that it was all over the place. And I do love your heart, and I love that like the onus I think of identity formation is for Gen Z is us. You know, it's not we can't just let them figure it out. When I meet with these Gen Zers, I try to put that mindset of like, what do I wish somebody would have told me when I was their age? You
Mm,
know, having gone through all the therapy and all the whatever doctoral courses and just writing all of that, like, what do I wish somebody would have told me when I was their age,
that's great.
just to kind of help them process through stuff? And don't get me wrong, they'll still need therapy like after all of that. But
For sure.
hopefully,
They've already been in it.
yeah, but hopefully, yeah, hopefully they have like a greater understanding of it and they're not afraid of it.
Well, you said earlier, it was interesting. You said that the developmental stages for everyone are the same, and it's the trends that we need to ignore and not worry about. And I totally agree. I mean, my students would mock me if I ever tried
Yeah,
to do anything remotely cool.
yeah,
Like I remember one time I kind of did this like raise the
yeah,
roof thing, and they were like, no, don't do that. But this is my concern for Gen Z. I think the developmental stages are getting delayed,
yeah, for
and that
sure.
really, and that's not because they're dumb.
No,
It's because it's just for a multitude of the reasons we talked about.
yeah,
It's overwhelming. There's too many choices. They're afraid of it not being perfect.
uh-huh,
All these different, things. There's so much pressure.
uh-huh.
They don't know how to sit with the unknown. So yeah,
And they're not going to learn it unless we model it for them. So we have to learn it.
and sit with them in it.
No, I love it. If there's anyone that wants to get a hold of you or contact you, what's the best way to do that?
Well, I have a website, KS Leadership Develop. That's all one word. .me.
Okay.
So KS Leadership Develop.me. And there's a contact thing at the bottom, and they can email me. I'm on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest way to get a hold of me, really. Although my website, go to my website.
All right on.
I need to push that up, but who cares? Find
No,
me either on LinkedIn or on the website.
no, this is great. Thank you for spending some time with me. We'll put this out there and we'll share it and hopefully people will be inspired by it. And I
Yeah,
mean,
and I'll
I'm
post it
inspired
on
by
my.
it. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thanks for all the questions and conversation, and it's fun to meet you. And
Yes.
who knows, maybe we'll have to have a part two at some point.
Oh yes, I already thought about the questions I would ask. You know,
Okay,
I'm
great.
doing well. Let me end this and then maybe we can hang out a little longer. Thank you so much.